Varenthis Station hung in the darkness between three empires, like a forgotten coin dropped between the cushions of the universe. Nobody owned it, and everybody used it. Pirates docked beside diplomats and criminals, shared drinks with merchants, and nobody asked questions because questions got you killed. The station was old and tired, and held together by rust and hope and the kind of stubborn determination that kept broken things working long after they should have died. It was here in this lawless place that Kira Vasquez found herself stranded. Her transport ship had suffered a catastrophic engine failure 3 days ago, and the captain had dumped all passengers at the nearest port before limping off to find repairs. Kira had exactly 47 credits to her name and no way to contact her aunt on the Terran colony of Meridian 7. She was 17 years old and completely alone by human standards. Kira was nothing special. She stood 5'6" with a lean frame that came from years of ration meals on cramped ships. Her dark hair was braided tight against her skull in the style her grandmother had taught her, and her brown eyes carried the kind of watchfulness that came from growing up in places where you learned to see trouble before it saw you. She wore warm cargo pants and a faded jacket that had belonged to her mother, and boots that had walked through 3 different worlds before finding her feet to other humans. She was just another refugee kid trying to survive, but to the aliens of the galactic community, she was something else entirely. She was a child of Earth, was classified as a Category 12 Death World by the Galactic Survey Commission. This meant that the planet was considered one of the most hostile environments capable of producing sentient life. The gravity was crushing by galactic standards. The atmosphere was corrosive. The weather systems were violent and unpredictable, and every continent was prowled by apex predators that had evolved over millions of years to become perfect killing machines. Humans had not only survived on this nightmare world, but had thrived. They had climbed to the top of the food chain by being smarter and more adaptable, and more ruthlessly persistent than anything else on their planet. The rest of the galaxy knew this. They had learned to give humans a wide berth, not because they feared them exactly, but because they understood that anything that could survive Earth was not to be trifled with. Kira did not feel dangerous. She felt tired and hungry and scared. She had taken work in the lower docks of Varenthis Station, loading cargo and running messages and doing whatever small jobs would earn her a few credits. The work was hard and the pay was terrible, but it kept her fed and gave her a place to sleep in the cramped worker dormitories. She kept her head down and stayed invisible and tried not to attract attention. Most of the alien species on the station ignored her completely. The Valeth, with their delicate insectoid bodies and compound eyes, skittered past her without a glance. Grellish merchants with their tentacles and calculating minds barely acknowledged her existence. Orthians with their massive bulk and gentle dispositions sometimes nodded in her direction, but never spoke. She was small and quiet and unimportant, and that suited her just fine. But not everyone ignored the humans who passed through. Varenthis Krethvac noticed. They always noticed the Krethvac were the other Death World species in the cataloged galaxy. Their homeworld of Kreth Prime was a Category 12 just like Earth, with crushing gravity and brutal conditions that had forged them into something terrifying. They stood 7 feet tall on average, with bodies covered in armored scales the color of dried blood. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could shear through hull plating like paper. Their faces were all angles and teeth, and their 4 eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence. They had built an empire on conquest. For 3,000 years, they had spread across the stars, taking what they wanted and destroying what they could not. Other species existed in 2 categories as far as the Krethvac were concerned: useful or prey. 3. Krethvac had claimed the lower docks of Varenthis Station as their territory. They called themselves the Bloodied Hand, and they were led by a scarred veteran named Tavrek, who had been exiled from the Empire for crimes even his own people found excessive wreck was enormous even by Krethvac standards, standing nearly 8 feet tall with scales that had been darkened by age and violence. His body was covered in ritual scars that marked his kills, and his eyes held the flat, dead calm of a creature that had long ago stopped seeing other beings as anything but obstacles. The Bloodied Hand ran a simple operation. They took a cut of everything that moved through the lower docks. Every merchant paid a protection fee. Every worker kicked back a percentage of their wages. Every ship that docked handed over a tribute. Those who paid were left alone. Those who did not paid in other ways. Kira had learned this on her first day when she watched a Grellish merchant who had refused to pay get. 2 of his tentacles severed in front of a crowd of silent witnesses. She had paid after that. Everyone paid it. Was just the cost of doing business on Varentis Station. Security drones that patrolled the lower levels had been programmed by the corporations that technically owned the station, and their programming had determined that interfering with the Bloodied Hand was not cost-effective, so they powered down whenever Tavrik and his crew appeared, and powered back up when they left. And everyone pretended this was normal. Kira hated it. She hated the fear that hung over the docks like a fog. She hated the way the other workers flinched whenever a Krethvac shadow fell across them. She hated the small, desperate calculations everyone made about how much they could afford to lose. But she was 17 years old and alone, and she had 47 credits and a dream of reaching Meridian 7 where her aunt waited, so she kept her head down and paid her tribute and told herself that this was not her fight. She was nobody, she was nothing. She was just trying to survive. And then one day, a Veleth merchant named Chitters in Starlight made a bad bet on a cargo of medical supplies and could not pay what she owed, and everything changed. The Veleth were prey species by every measure the galaxy used to classify such things. They had evolved on a gentle world with mild gravity and calm weather, and no predators larger than a small dog. Their bodies reflected this peaceful origin. They were delicate creatures standing about 4 feet tall with thin limbs covered in a soft exoskeleton that shimmered like mother of pearl. They had 4 arms that ended in nimble fingers perfect for fine manipulation and crafting. Their heads were dominated by large compound eyes that could see in almost every direction at once, which was useful when your ancestors had spent millions of years watching for danger. They communicated through a combination of clicks and whistles and subtle movements. Of their antennae, and their voices always carried a musical quality even when they were terrified. Chitters in Starlight was terrified now. She stood in the main cargo bay of the lower docks, surrounded by workers who had suddenly found reasons to be very busy somewhere else. Her compound eyes reflected the massive form of Tavrik in 1,000 fractured images, and every single one of those images showed a predator about to strike. The 2 other members of the Bloodied Hand stood behind their leader with their arms crossed and their teeth bared in expressions that might have been smiles on a species that understood the concept of mercy. Tavrik did not smile. He simply loomed. The Veleth merchant had been trying to explain her situation for several minutes now, and her voice had grown higher and more desperate with each passing moment. She had invested everything in a shipment of medical supplies from the outer colonies. The supplies were supposed to arrive 3 days ago. They had not arrived. The shipping company had gone bankrupt and taken her cargo with it. She had nothing left, nothing, except the debt she owed to the Bloodied Hand Tavrik. Listen to all of this with the patience of a creature that knew exactly how this conversation was going to end. When the Veleth finally ran out of words, he spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "You owe us payment. I know, and I will pay. I swear it. I just need more time. Please, just a little more time, and I will find a way. I have contacts in the upper levels who might be willing to. Time is not what you will pay with." The words fell like hammers, and the Veleth went silent. Tavrik reached out with one massive clawed hand, and his fingers closed around one of her antennae. The antennae were everything to a Veleth, were how the species experienced the world. Through those delicate stalks, they could sense vibrations and temperature changes and chemical traces and electromagnetic fields. Losing an antenna was like losing half your senses. It meant living the rest of your life in a muffled, half-blind state, unable to fully perceive the universe around you. It was a fate worse than death for her kind, and Tavrek knew it. Perhaps this will help you find the motivation to pay faster. He rumbled, chitters in starlight, screamed. It was a sound that cut through the cargo bay like broken glass, high and keening, and filled with a terror that went beyond simple fear of pain. It was the sound of a creature facing the destruction of everything that made life worth living. The workers in the cargo bay turned away. They found crates to inspect and manifest to check and conversations to have with people who were not there. The security drones that had been patrolling the area powered down with a soft whine, their corporate programming having determined once again that intervention was not cost-effective. Nobody was going to help. Nobody ever helped. This was just how things worked on Varenthus Station. Kira Vasquez watched from behind a stack of cargo crates about 30 feet away. She had been inventorying a shipment of machine parts when the confrontation started, and she had frozen in place, hoping that if she stayed quiet enough, she would not be noticed. Her heart was pounding against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were pressed flat against her thighs to keep them from shaking. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to look away, to pretend she had not seen anything, to stay invisible and safe and alive. This was not her fight. She was nobody. She was nothing. She was just a 17-year-old girl trying to survive long enough to reach her aunt on Meridian 7. The Velith screamed again as Tavrek tightened his grip. Walk away, the survival part of Kira's brain whispered in a voice that sounded like her grandmother. Walk away, little one. This is not your battle. You cannot win this fight. You cannot even survive this fight. He is a Krethvok warrior, and you are a child, and he will kill you. Without even trying, walk away. Live, reach Meridian 7. Forget you ever saw this. Kira tried to make her feet move toward the exit. They would not obey. Instead, she found herself remembering her grandmother's face. The old woman had survived 3 civil wars on Earth. Before the evacuation, she had lost 2 husbands and a daughter to violence. She had carried Kira's mother across 200 miles of hostile territory with nothing but a knife and her own stubborn refusal to die, and she had taught Kira everything she knew, not just how to fight, although she had taught her that too. She had taught her that some things mattered more than survival. She had taught her that the worst thing you could do was watch evil happen and do nothing. She had taught her that sometimes the only choice that let you live with yourself was the one that might get you killed. Tavrek's claw began to twist. Velith's screams took on a new quality of raw animal terror, and Kira Vasquez found her feet carrying her forward. Before she had made the conscious decision to move, "Hey!" her voice echoed across the cargo bay. It was not loud, but in the sudden silence, it might as well have been a thunderclap. Every eye in the room turned toward her compound eyes and four-eyed predator gazes, in the wide, startled looks of workers who could not believe what they were. Seeing Tavrek did not release the Velith, simply turned his massive head and fixed Kira with a stare that had made stronger beings soil themselves. "Another one. Who wishes to pay?" he asked. His voice was almost curious. "Let her go." The words came out steadier than Kira felt. She was walking forward, now step by step, crossing the empty space between the crates and the confrontation. Her hands hung loose at her sides. Her breathing was slow and controlled. Somewhere in the back of her mind, her grandmother was either proud or screaming at her stupidity, or possibly both. Other 2 Krethvak moved to flank her. She was surrounded now, 3 apex predators from a death world, each one capable of tearing her apart with their bare claws, and she was a 17-year-old human girl who weighed maybe 60 kilograms, soaking wet. Tavrek released the Velith merchant, who collapsed in a heap of trembling limbs and Broken sounds, he turned to face Kira fully, and for the first time something like interest flickered in his dead eyes. "Little Deathworlder," he said, "do you know what I am?" "Krethvek," Kira replied. "Warrior cast by your scarring pattern and probably killed your first sentient being before you were fully grown." Tavrek made a sound that might have been approval. "Before I had teeth," he corrected, and there was genuine pride in his voice. "I am Tavrek of the Bloodied Hand, and I have ended 217 sentient beings in personal combat, and I have bathed in the blood of—" Kira did not wait for him to finish. Later, the footage would be reviewed by station security and intelligence analysts and military experts from a dozen different species. They would slow it down frame by frame, trying to understand what they were seeing. They would run it through motion capture software and biomechanical modeling programs and predictive combat algorithms, and even at 1/10 speed with all their technology and expertise, they would struggle to comprehend how a 17-year-old human girl had done what she did. The fight lasted 2 seconds. 2 seconds that changed everything. In the first frame, Kira Vasquez was standing still. Her body showed none of the warning signs that predator species had evolved to recognize over millions of years. There was no shift in her weight, no tensing of muscles, no change in her breathing or her heart rate. Her eyes did not narrow, and her pupils did not dilate, and her hands did not clench into fists. She simply stood there looking up at the massive Krethvak warrior who was in the middle of boasting about his kills. And then she was not standing there anymore, she was inside his guard. The analysts would argue for years about how she covered the distance so quickly. Some said she must have been augmented with illegal military-grade cybernetics. Others claimed she had been trained by some secret Terran Special Forces programmer. Few suggested she was simply not human at all, but some kind of weapon wearing a human face. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. She was human, and humans were what happened when a prey species refused to accept its place in the food chain. Kira's palm struck Tavrak's throat with surgical precision. She hit him at the exact point where the armored scales of a Krethvak were thinnest, right where the throat had to remain flexible enough to allow speech and breathing. The scales, they were still tough enough to stop a knife. They were not tough enough to stop a strike that carried the full rotational force of her hips and shoulders and the desperate strength of a creature that had evolved on a world where hesitation meant death. The blow did not look powerful. It was a small hand attached to a small arm, driven by a body that massed perhaps 60 kilograms. Tavrak massed over 300. But mass was not everything. Speed and precision and knowing exactly where to hit mattered more. The strike crushed the nerve cluster beneath Tavrek's throat scales. It was not a killing blow. It was something worse. It was a shutdown command written in violence. Every muscle in the Krethvak's body went limp at once. He dropped straight down like a puppet whose strings had been cut, his massive frame hitting the deck plates with a crash that shook the cargo bay. He was not dead. He was not even unconscious. He was simply unable to move, unable to breathe properly, unable to do anything except lie there and feel his body betray him. Half a second had passed. The other two Krethvak were already reacting. They were warriors, and they had killed dozens of beings between them, and their reflexes were honed by a lifetime of combat. The one on Kira's left was faster. He launched a claw strike that should have cut her in half. From shoulder to hip, his arm was a blur of scaled muscle and razor edges, and it moved with all the speed his death world genetics could provide. Kira was not there. She had already moved, pivoting on her heel in a motion so smooth it looked like water flowing. The claw passed through empty air where she had been a fraction of a second before, and then her elbow drove into the nerve cluster beneath his second left arm. Krethvak had 4 arms, which meant they had 4 sets of nerve clusters controlling those arms. The cluster beneath the second left arm was connected to the others in a chain. Hit it hard enough, and the signals cascaded. His left side went dead. He screamed as his body twisted involuntarily, throwing him off balance. he stumbled and fell. 1 second had passed. The third Krethvac was smarter than his companions. He had seen what happened to the other two, and he understood that trying to hit this human was pointless. She was too fast, too precise, too wrong in ways his predator brain could not process. So he did what any sensible warrior would do when faced with a smaller opponent. He grabbed for her. His forearms spread wide, creating a cage of claws and muscle. He would catch her and crush her, and use his superior mass to end this impossibility once and for all. Kira let him catch her wrist. For an instant, the Krethvac felt triumph surge through him. He had her, she was his, and then she twisted. It was a small movement, almost delicate in its economy. She used his own grip as a fulcrum, turning her captured wrist into the center point of a lever. Body flowed around his arm like smoke. Suddenly, she was behind him, her legs wrapped around his neck. Her body weight torqued his spine at an angle that Krethvac anatomy was never designed to handle. He tried to reach for her with his other arms, but the angle was wrong, and his claws scraped uselessly at air. He tried to throw himself backward to crush her against the deck, but she had already shifted her weight, and he could not generate the momentum. He tried to simply power through, to use his strength to break her hold, but human bodies were designed for endurance, not just strength, and she had position and leverage and physics on her side. He went down, she rolled free, coming up in a crouch with her hands loose and ready to. Seconds had passed. Kira Vasquez stood in the center of three groaning Krethvac warriors. Her breathing was elevated but controlled. There was not a scratch on her or round her. The cargo bay had gone absolutely silent. The workers had stopped pretending to be busy. The Velith merchant had stopped whimpering. Even the background hum of the station seemed to have faded. Everyone was staring at the small human girl who had just dismantled 3 apex predators from a death world. In the time it took to blink, Vrek was trying to rise. His nervous system was starting to recover, and his claws scraped against the deck plates as he struggled to push himself up. Kira walked over to him. She knelt down beside his massive head, bringing her face close to his. Her 2 eyes met his. Your first mistake, she said quietly, was thinking that because humans do not have claws or scales or armor, we are not predators. Tavrik made a sound that might have been rage or fear or something in between. Kira stood up. Your second mistake was monologuing. She turned and walked over to where Chitters in starlight lay curled in a ball of trembling limbs. Velith flinched when Kira's shadow fell across her, as if expecting another attack instead. The human girl knelt down and spoke in a voice gentle enough to coax a frightened animal. Ah, you hurt. The Velith's compound eyes focused on her, and for a long moment she did not seem to understand the question. Then, slowly she shook her head. Her antennae were intact. She was bruised and terrified, but whole. Good, Kira said. I think it is time for you to find somewhere else to be. The Velith scrambled to her feet and fled without looking back. Kira watched her go and then turned to face the cargo bay full of staring workers. The show is over, she said. Get back to work. And because she was a human, and because they had just seen what humans could do, they obeyed. Behind her, Tavrik had finally managed to get to his feet. His 2 companions were still struggling to rise, and his body was still not fully under his control, but his voice worked well enough for what he wanted to say. This is not over, little Death Worlder, he growled. You have no idea what you have started. Kira did not turn around. Probably not, she admitted, and then she walked away. The story spread faster than light-speed communication should have allowed. Within hours, every being on Varenta Station knew about the human girl. They heard about the cargo bay and the 3 Krethvac warriors and the 2 seconds that had changed. Everything they heard, how she had moved like water and struck like lightning and walked away without a scratch. They heard that she was young, just a teenager stranded and alone, and waiting for passage to some distant colony. By the time the station's day cycle ended, the story had grown. Some versions claimed she had killed all 3 Krethvac with her bare hands. Others said she had done it blindfolded while reciting poetry in an ancient Earth language. A few whispered that she was not a stranded traveler at all, but a Terran special forces operative sent to destabilize the station's criminal networks. The truth was far simpler, but nobody wanted to believe that. Nobody wanted to accept that a 17-year-old girl had dismantled 3 apex predators simply because she had been taught well and refused to look away. Kira did not want any of this attention. She wanted to disappear back into the lower docks and continue working toward her passage to Meridian-7. She wanted to forget the cargo bay and the fight and the way Tarek's eyes had looked when she stood over him. But the galaxy was not going to let her forget. On the 3rd day after the incident, she was summoned before the station's governing council. There was no formal government on Varenthus Station. Instead, power was held by a loose coalition of crime lords and corporate representatives and independent operators who had agreed that stability was good for business. They met in a chamber on the upper levels of the station, where the air was clean and the walls were decorated with artwork stolen from a dozen different worlds. Kira had never been this high up before. She had never even seen the upper levels, except in pictures. The chamber was circular with a raised platform at the center, where she was expected to stand. Around her in a ring of elevated seats sat the beings who controlled everything that happened on Varenthus. There was a Grellish merchant prince whose tentacles were adorned with rings worth more than Kira would earn in a lifetime. There was a scarred human man who ran the weapons trade through the outer sectors. There was a Horthian matriarch whose legitimate shipping company was a front for smuggling operations that spanned 3 systems, and there was a Felindra diplomat named Sareth who claimed to represent legitimate interests and whose feline features gave away nothing of what she was thinking. Sareth was old. Her fur had gone silver with age, and her eyes held the weight of centuries. She was the one who spoke first. "You have created a problem, child." Her voice was soft and musical, but there was iron beneath the melody. "The Krethvok are demanding your head, and they mean this literally, as they wish to mount it on a trophy wall." Kira kept her expression neutral. "I was defending someone who could not defend herself." "You humiliated a warrior species," the Grellish merchant prince interjected, and his tentacles writhed with agitation. 3 of their elite beaten by a juvenile Deathworlder female. And do you understand what that does to their social structure? Kira did understand. The Krethvak built their entire civilization on the concept of strength and dominance. To be defeated in combat was shameful. Be defeated by someone smaller and weaker and younger was catastrophic. Tavrak could never go home now. His honor was destroyed, and his name was a joke, and every Krethvak in the Empire would know that he had been brought low by a human child. "What do you want from me?" Kira Skedserith's whiskers twitched in what might have been amusement. "We want to offer you a job." The proposal was simple. Kira would stay on Varenthus Station and serve as the Council's visible enforcer. She would be given quarters on the upper levels and a salary that would make her wealthy by any reasonable standard. In exchange, she would ensure that certain business arrangements remained stable and that certain people understood the consequences of causing trouble. "You want me to be a thug," Kira said. "We want you to be a deterrent," Sareth replied, and there was something like respect in her ancient eyes. "You have already proven you are very good at it." Kira thought about the offer. She thought about the credits she would earn and the safety she would have and the power that would come with the Council's backing. She thought about how easy it would be to say yes and let herself become the weapon they wanted her to be. Then she thought about chitters in starlight trembling on the cargo bay floor. She thought about all the other Veleth and Grellish and Horthians in the lower levels who lived in fear because there was no one to protect them. She thought about what her grandmother would say if she could see her now. "No," Kira said. The word fell into silence. The council members exchanged glances, and even Sarath's carefully neutral expression flickered with surprise. "No," the Grellish merchant repeated as if he had not heard correctly. "I am not going to be your enforcer," Kira said, and her voice was steady even though her heart was racing. I am not going to help you keep people afraid so that your businesses run smoothly." "Then what?" Sareth asked. "Will you run back to the lower docks and hide until you have scraped together enough credits to flee this station?" "No," Kira said again. "I am not running, and I am not hiding, but I am also not working for you." She took a breath. "There are people on this station who need help, and they are not going to get it from any of you because you do not care about them, and you never have, and you never will. And you care about them." The human weapons dealer asked with a sneer in his voice. "I do not know yet," Kira admitted, "but I know I cannot walk away and pretend I do not see what is happening." "Here," Sareth leaned forward, and her golden eyes were sharp. "You would make enemies of us." "I am making enemies everywhere I look," Kira said. "At least this way, I get to choose which ones." She turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, the council erupted in arguments and accusations and demands that she be stopped, but nobody moved to block her path. They were curious to see what she would do. Perhaps they were afraid of what would happen if they tried to stop her, or perhaps they simply could not believe that anyone would be foolish enough to turn down their offer. Kira did not know, and she did not care. She walked out of the council chamber and took the lift back down to the lower levels. The air grew thicker as she descended, and the walls grew dirtier, and the faces around her grew more desperate. This was where she belonged, above with the powerful, but below with the forgotten. She had no plan and no resources and no allies. She had only her skills and her stubborn refusal to look away from suffering. It would have to be enough. When she reached the lower docks, she found Chitters in Starlight waiting for her. The Veluth merchant looked better than she had 3 days ago. Her compound eyes were brighter, and her antennae stood tall, and there was something in her posture that had not been there before. "I heard what you did," Chitters said. "I heard you told them no. Word travels fast. On this station, yes, always." The Veluth moved closer, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "There are others who want to meet you, and others who want to know if what they say about you is true." "What do they say about me?" Chitters in Starlight looked at Kira with all her 1,000 compound eyes. "They say you are not afraid." Kira thought about the cargo bay and the 3 Krethvac and the 2 seconds that had changed. Everything she thought about the council chamber, and the offer she had refused, and the enemies she had made. She thought about her grandmother and the lessons she had learned, and the price of looking away. "I am terrified," she said honestly, "but that does not mean I am going to stop." The Veluth made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Then come with me, and I will introduce you to the others who are also terrified and also refuse to stop." Kira followed her into the depths of the station, and somewhere far above, the council was still arguing about what to do with the human girl who had said no. 3 months passed, and Varentis station changed. It happened slowly at first, in ways that were hard to notice unless you knew where to look. The bloodied hand was gone. Tarek and his 2 companions had slunk away in the night, boarding a transport bound for Kreth Prime, where they would spend the rest of their lives trying to outrun the shame of their defeat. Other predators had tried to fill the void they left behind. None of them had lasted long. Word had spread through the lower levels about the human girl, and word had a way of making things complicated for anyone who thought they could take what the Krethvac had lost. In place of the old protection rackets, a new system had emerged. They called themselves the Sheltered. It was not an organization exactly, and it was not a government, and it was certainly not a gang. It was more like a family or a neighborhood watch, or a promise made between beings who had finally decided they were tired of being afraid. The Sheltered looked out for each other when a merchant could not pay their docking fees. The Sheltered found a way to help. When a worker was cheated by their employer, the Sheltered made sure justice was done. When a predator came looking for easy prey, the Sheltered made sure the prey was not alone. And at the center of it all, like a stone dropped into still water, was Kira Vesquez. She had not asked to be a leader. She had not wanted to be a symbol, but the role had found her anyway, because that was what happened when You refused to look away every evening after the work shifts ended. She held training sessions in an abandoned cargo bay beings of a dozen different species. Came to learn Veleth and Grelish and Horthians and others whose names she was still learning. Gathered in the dim light and listened as she taught them what her grandmother had taught. Here a young Veleth named Whispers in Darkness was struggling with a basic grappling technique, and his thin limbs kept getting tangled in positions that made no sense for his anatomy. "This does not work," he complained. "I am not built like you, and I cannot move like you. And this is impossible." Kira walked over and knelt beside him. "You are right," she said. "You cannot move like me, and I would never ask you to try." Whispers looked confused. "Then why are you teaching us your techniques?" "I am not teaching you my techniques," Kira said. "I am teaching you to understand how bodies work and how force works and how to use both in your favor." She gestured at his thin, flexible limbs. "Your body is different from mine, and that is not a weakness, and that is a strength, and you just have to learn how to use it. But I am small and weak, and I have no claws and no armor, and nothing that makes a predator. Fear me." Kira smiled, and it was the kind of smile that held secrets. Every species has something, and every body has a gift, and your job is to find yours. She spent the next hour working with Whispers, showing him how his flexibility could be turned into an advantage, and how his low center of gravity made him hard to knock down, and how his compound eyes let him see attacks coming from angles that other species could not perceive. By the end of the session, Whispers had successfully escaped 3 different holds and thrown a Horthian twice his size to the Mavi, who was grinning so wide that his mandibles ached. The Felindra diplomat Sarath came to watch sometimes. She never participated and she never spoke, but she was always there in the shadows with her golden eyes reflecting the light. One evening after everyone else had left, she approached Kira. "You have cost us a great deal of money, you know," Sarah said, and her voice held no accusation, just simple fact: the protection fees alone represent a significant loss to the council's revenue. Kira shrugged. "Find another revenue stream." "We already have, and that is not why I am here." The old Felindra's tail swished slowly back and forth as she studied Kira with eyes that had seen 3 centuries of history. "I have been alive for a very long time, and I have watched empires rise and fall, and I have seen revolutions spark and die, and I have witnessed more changes than most species experience in their entire existence." She paused. "And I have never seen anything quite like what you have done." "I have not done anything," Kira said. "I just showed people they could stand up." Sarath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That child is the most dangerous thing in the universe." A message arrived that night from Meridian 7. Kira read it in the small quarters. She had claimed in the lower levels, which were cramped and dirty, and nothing like the luxury apartment the council had offered her. Her aunt wanted to know when she would be coming home. She had heard rumors about what was happening on Varenta Station, and she was worried. She wanted Kira safe and close and far away from the chaos that seemed to follow her everywhere. Kira looked at the message for a long time. She thought about Meridian 7 and the quiet life that waited for her there. She thought about her aunt who had taken her in when her grandmother died and loved her like a daughter. She thought about all the normal things she had wanted and the simple future she had planned. Then she looked out the small viewport in her quarters at the stars that stretched into infinity. Somewhere out there were other stations like Varenthasars, or places where the weak were prey and the strong took what they wanted, and nobody ever stood up because standing up was dangerous and futile and pointless. Other beings like Chitters in starlight and Whispers in darkness, who had never known what it meant to have someone in their corner. Kira began to type her response. "I will be a little longer than expected because there is work to do out here." She paused and thought about how to explain what she had found. "But I'm okay, and better than okay, actually, because I finally figured out what I am supposed to be. She sent the message and turned back to face the station. Somewhere in the distance she could hear voice Velith and Grelish and Horthians and humans all talking and laughing and arguing about the techniques they had learned Velith was teaching. A Horthian the hold Kira had shown them earlier. A Grelish merchant was explaining to a new arrival that no, they did not have to pay protection anymore because things were different now. A young human boy who had arrived on the station just last week was listening with wide eyes as an old Felindra told him stories about the girl who had beaten 3 Krethvok warriors in 2 seconds. The galaxy had plenty of predators. It always would. There would always be Tavraks waiting to take what they wanted from those too weak to stop them. There would always be councils who cared more about profit than people. There would always be systems designed to keep the powerful powerful and the powerless afraid. But now there was something else too now. There was the sheltered spreading through the lower levels of Varenthus Station, like seeds taking root in rocky soil. Now, they were prey species learning that they did not have to be prey now. There was a 17-year-old girl from Earth who had looked at the way things were and decided that was not the way things had to be. Kira Vasquez stood at her viewport and watched the stars spin slowly past. She was still small. She was still young. She was still just one person in a universe that did not care about fairness or justice or hope. But she was not nobody anymore, and she was not nothing. She was a daughter of Earth's. She was a Death Worlder, and she was just getting started outside her viewport. The galaxy waited, and for the first time in a very long time, the predators had something to fear.